The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss. I hope you've been enjoying this series of videos on Carl Orff's Carmina Burana. Recently, as we've been approaching this medley of songs and dances in the Auf dem Anger section of the first part, I've been pondering how to present the analysis, either as one huge video covering all three songs, or as three separate videos containing one song each. And now that the time has finally arrived, I've decided on the second option, as each song really stands on its own structurally and conceptually, though, of course, altogether, they make a terrifically exciting mini-suite. However, I've released these videos publicly all on the same day, so they may be viewed all together as a set, just as the medley is intended. So let's start with the opening dance, titled Reie. This is a Middle High German version of the modern word also pronounced Reie, which means row, as in young knights and maidens dancing in rows, in those stately formations you may have seen in paintings and reenactments of ancient choreography. This all may seem quite fussy and out of date, but there was a real art and strategy to some of these forms, and it took the kind of skill that the Goliards' rich fathers would have spent a pretty penny on, hiring dancing masters to train their sons. Of course, just like the other purely instrumental number Tanz, which we looked at a couple of months ago, there's nothing in the ancient collection of Carmina Burana poems and song lyrics about this slow, carefully paced, rather hypnotic music. But it does capture the spirit of that age rather eloquently. The opening page contains the entire ensemble to be used for this part of the medley. A little orchestra within the orchestra designed for a kind of dreamy, floating sound despite its deliberate tread. Muted strings form the dark, husky center of the sound picture. And at first, all the other elements simply add emphasis, sonic icing, or a touch of distant, regal grandeur. Contrabassoon comprising the total representation of the wind section, with horns, sea trumpets, and tuba below, which will become ever more important toward the end of the dance. Timpani also plays a key role, along with bass drum, not to mention the occasional appearance here at the beginning of triangle and cymbal pair. However, it's somewhat easier to think of these instruments in terms of their roles, rather than their standard groupings. The plainest of all must certainly be the bass instruments. Unison contrabassoon and double bass on those diving C octaves, the latter with a touch more tenuto on the staccato to give the tone a heavier string edge. Here's where the character of that instrument as a member of the viol family becomes much more apparent, and that only underlines the callback to a perceived medieval style, though bowed concert instruments really were an outgrowth of a later period, violin family or viol family. Tuba takes the octave above, essentially inhabiting the body of tone of the lower instruments, making their root tone all the more firm and heavy, more than just adding an octave as cellos would. Timpani and bass drum perform a similar role in terms of resonance, the round ping of the kettle filling out the higher note, and the toneless thud of the bass drum magnifying the lower note. And, of course, both add more attack to each tone, but not overwhelmingly. It takes sensitive direction from the conductor to make this a graceful, if deliberate, footfall, rather than just heavy plodding. Despite the meter of each measure being structured around the organization of the melody, the falling octaves are scored out with a very regular pulse of 4 half-note beats, until each phrase closes with a shortened pulse. Once again, Orff is suggesting that the bygone roots of Western music weren't so straightforward as we might suspect, at least metrically. Softly glowing from within, the cellos hang on low open C fifths, with more of an ambient drone than anything too prominent. This is all just the foundation upon which the upper strings build their thematic content. In this case, a Sol G chorale in 3 parts, harmonized in very simple triads throughout. The articulation is painstakingly crafted for a kind of slow but light-footed grace, with a lot of lift in between heavier emphases, and even some heavier notes are lightened a little with tenuto staccato. But the top 2 voices being played throughout on the denser 4th string once again calls back to that chesty yet veiled sound of a viol consort. This creates the overall impression of formal elegance, in which intermingling rows of dancers move from partner to partner, sharing moments of conjoined motion and social contact. It's the opposite of the lazy sloppiness that occasionally mars the performance of this dance. Rather, the whole thing should be executed with utmost care, almost suspensefully, as the andante poco esitante tempo implies. One false step could finish the amorous career of many a would-be lover. I saved the little concluding chord at the end for its own analysis. The intense weight of that footfall transformed into a rich, dark texture when sustained, especially in the muted tenuto strings stacking the low root C of the basses, the C-fifth of the cellos, and a C major triad in violins and violas 2 octaves higher. Contrabassoon and bass drum add some solidity to the double basses, as does the tuba to the root C of the cellos, and lower horns to outlining the upper strings chord. The energy and color here come from new elements, high horns and C trumpets playing a clear, calm chord within the lower range of this texture to a little splash of cymbal pair, and then jumping the whole thing up an octave where it will hang in the air with bright, slightly distant eloquence over rolled triangle and a rolled C3 on timpani. It's the part in the dance where the couples draw apart and bow to their partners before moving on. The trumpet's portamento marking might seem to imply a kind of rip or glissando scoop up to the higher pitches, but nobody ever plays it that way. What Orff really means is to keep the C trumpet's pistons open and merely slur overblowing to the higher partials. 6th partial to 12th for the first trumpet, 5th partial to 10th for the second trumpet. Almost nobody ever plays it this way either, but sometimes there are exceptions. The next screen is essentially the same as the first, except with the upper strings marked mezzo piano and the other instruments piano for the duration of the chorale, but once again ending with a distant pianissimo for the whole ensemble. Something I didn't mention in the last screen, because it was notated a little carelessly, was the use of an octave G natural harmonic, a very simple effect to throw in, as the finger position already covers the area an octave above the open pitch, and all the players have to do is rest their fingers gently on the 4th string's octave node to produce a momentarily hollow-sounding note. The rest of the dance takes the form of a coda section on this screen and the next, with the texture lightened considerably by the removal of the cello drone on that low C5th, and the absence of the bass drum from here on. As the bass line is now alternating between C and G, and leaving out the lowest C, there's now no need for the bass drum to bulk anything up. The timpani can handle both pitches with ease. Interestingly, contrabassoon, low horns, tuba, and timpani are all marked pianissimo, with the string section pianissimo, except for the cello Gs, indicating that Orff really wants the chorale texture to pull back and let the accompaniment stand out just a hair. But conductors usually keep this more traditionally balanced. Pizzicato double basses will make everything feel a bit more light-footed, as if our dancers have found a more natural pace here nearing the end, though there will still be a darker sense of weight with the contrabassoon doubling, and the tuba plus timpani taking the octave above. The slightly softer upper string chorale simply reduces to alternating C major and D minor triads, with the occasional G octave and a fifth as a little cadence wrapping up each phrase. The best thing on this whole fairly basic page is the support from low horns of a simple-sounding G octave warming the texture, discreet though it may be. Orff is terrific at these subtle insinuations. On the final screen, all the basic functions are very easy to visually organize. Contrabassoon, tuba, timpani, and pizzicato double basses playing those same octave 1s and 5s. Cellos throwing in their low C5th drone, in between a few Gs as well. And violins and violas alternating between a simple C major root triad and that same G octave and a fifth we looked at before, outlined by the lower horns C5th and G octaves. But the high brass are back, playing a more involved, distant fanfare covering the natural pitches of the C trumpets, supported an octave below by first and third horn, G5th, C3rd, D4th, and then resolving back to a C3rd, back and forth once, twice, then 3 times in a row. Once again, there's no need for the trumpet players to lay a single finger on any of their pistons. It's the perfect way to end this echo of courtly dancing, with the lords and ladies taking one last bow to one another as the music closes. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is just the first number in a set of 3 making up this medley. Please join me in the next video for the wild ride of Svatsi Got Umba, a chaotic maypole dance that circles around rather aggressively once the men realize that the women might just rather hang out with each other all summer long. But before that, let me run this first little dance all the way through for you again with score and audio. See you soon.